The transport ship Meridian's edge groaned like a dying beast as it plummeted through. Kepler, 442b's atmosphere. Captain Zarek Thane gripped his restraints, watching the altimeter spin wildly while emergency klaxons screamed their mechanical death song. Sparks cascaded from shattered control panels, illuminating the terror-stricken faces of his mixed crew. "Hull breach in compartment 7, shouted his communications officer, a nervous Altarian whose blue skin had turned pale as moonlight. "We are losing atmospheric pressure fast." Thane's weathered hands danced across the emergency controls, muscle memory from 30 years of deep space hauling, keeping him focused while his ship died around him. The cargo hold contained 47 refugees from the Proxima Beta mining disaster, plus his crew of 12. 59 souls hurtling toward an uncharted world at terminal velocity. "Emergency beacon is transmitting," called out his navigator, Lieutenant Kessvalder. Her voice remained steady despite the blood trickling from a gash above her left eye. "But we are 15 light years from the nearest Imperial outpost." Among the refugees huddled in the cargo bay sat Marcus Webb, a human construction worker who'd been fleeing the mining station when the quantum reactors overloaded. He'd lost everything in the explosion: his wife, his daughter, his entire world reduced to radioactive ash. Now he sat strapped to a cold metal bench, watching alien faces twisted with the same fear he felt gnawing at his guts. The Altarians whispered prayers to their crystal gods. Centaurian traders clutched their profit ledgers like religious texts. The handful of other humans stared at the deck plating, lost in their own private hells. But Webb studied the ship's structure, noting the emergency supply lockers, the tool compartments, the way the hull plates were welded together. Old habits died hard, and Marcus Webb had been building things since he could hold a hammer. The first impact came without warning. The Meridian's edge struck the planet's surface at a shallow angle, skipping like a stone across an ocean of purple grass before slamming into a rocky outcropping. The ship's spine snapped with a sound like thunder, splitting the vessel into 3 burning sections. When the smoke cleared and the screaming stopped, Webb found himself hanging upside down in his restraints, blood pooling in his sinuses. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows. Around him, survivors groaned and called out in a dozen different languages. "Sound off!" Captain Thane's voice echoed from somewhere in the wreckage. "Anyone who can move, report your status." Webb unclipped his harness and dropped to what had been the ceiling. His left shoulder throbbed where the restraint had dug in, but nothing felt broken. He helped the dazed Centaurian woman to her feet, then started checking on the other refugees. The tally was grim. 23 survivors out of 59 scattered across the 3 sections of wreckage. No working communications equipment. No functioning life support systems. And according to the planet's atmospheric readings they'd glimpsed before the crash, the local weather patterns included violent electrical storms that could last for days. "Well, this is just fantastic," muttered Chief Engineer Dax Corwin, a grizzled veteran whose cybernetic left arm sparked intermittently. "We are stranded on an uncharted world with no supplies, no shelter, and no way to call for help. Anyone have any bright ideas?" The survivors had gathered in the largest section of wreckage, the former cargo bay, now open to Kepler, 442b's alien sky. The air was breathable but thin, like standing a high altitude. 2 pale suns hung overhead, casting strange double shadows across a landscape of rolling purple hills and twisted metallic trees. Captain Thane consulted his portable scanner, one of the few pieces of equipment that had survived the crash intact. Atmospheric composition is within acceptable parameters for most species present. Gravity is 0.87 standard. Temperature is dropping, though, down to minus 15 Celsius after local sunset. "How long until dark?" asked Dr. Marina Vasquez, the ship's medical officer. She'd been treating injuries with supplies salvaged from the medical bay, her hands steady despite the circumstances. "For hours, maybe 5, Thane replied. "Local day cycle appears to be roughly 28 standard hours." Lieutenant Valder limped over to the group, favoring her right leg. "I have been monitoring the atmospheric disturbances. There's a massive storm system moving in from the east. Lightning, high winds, torrential precipitation. It will hit us just after sunset. The Altarians began their prayer chants again, harmonious voices rising and falling like ocean waves. The Centaurians huddled together, their commercial instincts useless in this survival situation. Most of the humans sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their predicament. But Marcus Webb was already moving. He'd found a maintenance toolkit in the wreckage and was systematically stripping useful materials from the ship's damaged hull. Titanium steel support beams, insulation panels, flexible conduit, emergency power cells. "What are you doing?" asked Captain Thane, watching Webb work with methodical efficiency. "Building shelter," Webb replied without looking up. He was using a plasma cutter to slice through a section of hull plating, sparks dancing around his hands. "That storm's going to turn this wreck into a lightning rod, and we will all be sleeping in puddles if we don't get some kind of protection built." Chief Engineer Corwin snorted derisively. "With what materials? We have got scattered debris and broken equipment. You can't build a proper shelter from scrap metal." Webb straightened up, his weathered face creased in a sardonic smile. "Chief, I have built worker housing on asteroid mining stations using nothing but salvaged hull plates and determination. I have constructed emergency shelters on gas giant moons where the atmospheric pressure could crush a man's skull. You give me some basic materials and a few hours, I will give you a structure that will keep us dry and alive." "He's just one person," protested a Centaurian merchant named Poke Gestran. His blue-green skin had taken on a sickly pallor since the crash. "How can one individual possibly construct adequate shelter for 23 beings?" "Because that's what humans do," Webb said simply. "We build things. We solve problems. We survive." Dr. Vasquez looked up from bandaging a young Altarian's broken arm. "I have seen human construction crews work. They are quite remarkable, actually. Their species seems to have an instinctive understanding of structural engineering." Webb had already begun laying out his materials in organized piles. Hull plates here, support beams there, insulation panels stacked by size and thickness. His movements were economical and purposeful, each action part of a larger plan taking shape in his mind. "I will need some help," he said, addressing the group. "Nothing complicated, just extra hands for lifting and holding pieces in place while I weld." Captain Thane nodded slowly. He'd commanded mixed-species crews long enough to recognize competence when he saw it. "What do you need us to do?" The next 3 hours passed in a blur of focused activity. Webb directed the work like a conductor leading an orchestra. Each survivor assigned tasks based on their physical capabilities and technical knowledge. The Altarians, with their natural affinity for harmonic resonance, helped align the structural elements. The Centaurians, despite their complaints, proved surprisingly good at organizing materials. Chief Engineer Corwin, his initial skepticism fading, assisted with the more technical aspects of the construction. His cybernetic arm, despite its occasional sparking, provided enhanced strength for lifting heavy components. "You know," he said as they wrestled a particularly stubborn support beam into position, "I have been building ships for 23 years, and I have never seen anyone work quite like this." Webb grunted as he applied the plasma welder to a joint. Different environments, same principles. Structural integrity, weather resistance, thermal efficiency. Whether you're building a habitat module or a storm shelter, the basics don't change. The alien suns were beginning to set when Webb put the finishing touches on their shelter. It wasn't pretty, built from salvaged materials and held together with improvised welding, but it was solid. The structure measured roughly 6 meters by 4 meters, with a slanted roof designed to shed water and a reinforced frame that could withstand significant wind loads. "It looks like a metal shed," observed Lieutenant Valder, though her tone held grudging admiration. "It's a metal shed," Webb replied cheerfully. "A very well-built metal shed that will keep 23 people alive through whatever this planet wants to throw at us." The first drops of rain began falling just as they finished moving the injured survivors inside. Within minutes, the drops became a deluge, sheets of purple-tinged water driven horizontal by howling winds. Lightning split the darkening sky, illuminating a landscape transformed into a hellish tableau of wind and rain. Inside the shelter, the survivors huddled together for warmth. The structure creaked and groaned under the storm's assault, but the walls held firm. Water ran off the slanted roof in steady streams, pooling harmlessly outside rather than seeping through the joints. "This is impossible," muttered Pope Gestran, his voice barely audible over the storm's roar. No single individual could have constructed such an effective shelter in so little time. Captain Thane settled back against the insulated wall, exhaustion finally catching up with him. "You obviously haven't spent much time around humans. They have this annoying habit of doing impossible things on a regular basis." Dr. Vasquez was making another round of her patients, checking vitals and adjusting bandages. "The structural integrity is remarkable," she said to Webb, who sat near the shelter's entrance monitoring the storm through a small observation port he'd installed. "How did you know it would hold up to conditions like this?" Webb shrugged, his attention focused on the lightning display outside. "Experience, mostly. I have weathered storms on 17 different worlds, from the methane hurricanes of Titan Prime to the crystal dust tornadoes of the Vega system. You learn to read the signs, to build for conditions worse than what you expect." A particularly violent lightning strike illuminated the wreckage of their ship, now scattered across the landscape like the bones of some massive beast. The main hull sections were already partially flooded, rainwater mixing with leaked fuel and hydraulic fluid to create toxic pools. "We would have been electrocuted," whispered an Altarian refugee, her crystalline eyes wide with realization. "If we had remained in the ship's remains, that lightning would have killed us all. Probably just knocked you unconscious," Webb corrected mildly, though the hypothermia from sleeping in puddles of freezing water would have finished the job by morning. The storm raged for 6 more hours, a display of planetary fury that left even the experienced space travelers awed and terrified. But inside their improvised shelter, the survivors remained warm and dry. Webb had even managed to rig a small heating element using power cells salvaged from the emergency equipment, providing enough warmth to keep the internal temperature above freezing. When the purple dawn finally broke over Kepler 442b, revealing a landscape scoured clean by the storm, the survivors emerged from their shelter to survey the damage. The ship's wreckage had been scattered even further, useful materials buried under debris or washed away by the floods. But Webb's shelter stood intact, its improvised construction having weathered the storm better than structures built by professional engineers with proper materials and unlimited time. "Remarkable," said Chief Engineer Corwin, running his hand along one of the welded joints. "The stress distribution is perfect. The water drainage system worked flawlessly. Even the heating element maintained optimal efficiency throughout the night." Captain Thane was using his scanner to assess their situation. "The storm system is moving west, but there's another one building about 50 kilometers to the south. We might have 12 hours before the next wave hits." "Then we'd better get to work," Webb said simply. "That was just a temporary shelter. If we're going to be here for any length of time, we will need something more permanent." The other survivors stared at him in amazement. Here was a human who had just accomplished what they had considered impossible, and his response was to immediately start planning the next impossible task. "More permanent?" asked Dr. Vasquez. "What exactly did you have in mind?" Webb gestured toward a rocky outcropping about 200 meters from their current position. "Underground bunker, carved into that ridge. Natural protection from storms, better thermal insulation, room for workshops and storage areas. Give me a week, and I will have us set up with proper living quarters." "With what tools?" demanded Gestran. "We have no excavation equipment, no heavy machinery, no construction materials beyond what we can scavenge from the wreckage." Webb's grin was sharp as a knife's edge. "Gestran, you're thinking like someone who's never had to build something with nothing but determination and spite. Humans have been constructing shelters since before we had metal tools. We will make do." And as the alien suns climbed higher into Kepler 442b's strange sky, Marcus Webb began planning their next impossible project, while around him the other survivors slowly began to understand that their definition of impossible might need some serious revision. The next morning brought revelations that would have sent lesser beings into despair. Captain Thane's atmospheric readings revealed that Kepler 442b experienced megastorms every 72 hours, each one more violent than the last. The planet's dual star system created unstable weather patterns that could generate lightning strikes powerful enough to vaporize titanium. So we are looking at another storm in 2 days, Thane announced to the gathered survivors. And according to these readings, it's going to make last night's tempest look like a gentle spring shower. The Altarians began their morning songs, low harmonies that spoke of acceptance and resignation. The Centaurians calculated odds of survival with the cold precision of actuarial tables. Most of the humans stared at the ground, overwhelmed by the impossibility of their situation. But Marcus Webb was already stripping useful components from the ship's destroyed navigation array, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency. 2 days, he muttered to himself, cutting it close, but doable. Chief Engineer Corwin watched Webb work with growing fascination. "You are serious about this underground bunker idea, aren't you?" "Dead serious," Webb replied, using a molecular separator to extract rare earth element from the navigation computer's processing core. "We need thermal mass, structural integrity, and electromagnetic shielding. Surface structures won't cut it when those storms start throwing around lightning bolts that could power a small city." Dr. Vasquez approached with her medical scanner active, monitoring Webb's vital signs out of professional curiosity. "Your stress hormones are actually decreasing as the situation becomes more challenging. That's highly unusual for any species I've studied." Webb paused in his work, considering her observation. "Stress comes from uncertainty. Once I know what needs to be built, the rest is just engineering and elbow grease." Lieutenant Valder limped over, her injured leg still bothering her despite Dr. Vasquez's treatment. "The geological surveys from our approach scans showed that ridge is composed of sedimentary rock with a hardness rating of 7.3. You'd need industrial excavation equipment to dig through that." "Would I?" Webb asked with that sharp-edged grin that was becoming familiar to the survivors. He held up a component he'd extracted from the ship's fusion drive assembly. "Plasma torch, reconfigured for sustained low-intensity output. Won't cut through hull plating like the emergency torches, but will turn rock into vapor given enough time. The power requirements alone would drain our emergency cells in hours," protested Corwin. Webb gestured toward the wreckage scattered across the purple landscape. 3 separate power systems in that debris field. Backup fusion cells, solar collection arrays, even some old-fashioned chemical batteries. Chain them together with the right load balancing configuration, and we will have juice for days. Poke Gestran, who had spent the morning calculating their chances of rescue, shook his blue-green head in disbelief. "Even assuming you could generate sufficient power and excavate the rock, you'd still need to construct support structures, ventilation systems, water management, waste processing. The complexity is astronomical." "Is it?" Webb's tone held that particular brand of human amusement that other species found both endearing and terrifying. "Gestran, my grandfather built subway tunnels under New Tokyo using steam-powered equipment and dynamite. My father constructed underwater habitats in Europa's ice-locked oceans with tools that would look primitive by today's standards. Humans have been digging holes in the ground since before we figured out agriculture." The next 18 hours became a masterclass in human problem-solving. Webb organized the survivors into work teams based on their physical capabilities and technical knowledge. The Altarians, with their harmonic resonance abilities, helped identify stress points in the rock formation. The Centaurians, despite their constant complaints, proved surprisingly adept at managing power distribution networks. Webb himself worked with the focused intensity of a man possessed. He rigged the plasma torch using components from 4 different ship systems, creating a cutting tool that could operate continuously for hours without overheating. He designed a debris removal system using the ship's cargo handling equipment, modified to function in the planet's reduced gravity. Most impressively, he solved the ventilation problem by creating a thermal updraft system that used the planet's temperature differentials to maintain air circulation. No fans, no pumps, just clever engineering that turned environmental challenges into mechanical advantages. "This is impossible," Gestran muttered for the 100th time, watching Webb carve through solid rock like it was soft cheese. No single individual possesses the knowledge and skill to design and construct such complex systems. Captain Thane, who had been monitoring their progress with a scanner, looked up from his readings. "Gestran, you keep saying that word. I don't think it means what you think it means, at least not when humans are involved." By the end of the first day, Webb had excavated a chamber 3 meters deep, 2 meters wide, and 4 meters long. Not much by most standards, but carved from solid rock using improvised tools and sheer determination. The walls were smooth and precisely angled, designed to distribute structural loads evenly throughout the surrounding stone. "The excavation rate is remarkable," observed Dr. Vasquez, who had been documenting Webb's work for what she privately hoped would become a scientific paper. "You are removing approximately 0.7 cubic meters of material per hour using equipment that shouldn't be capable of such efficiency." Webb paused to wipe sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of stone dust across his weathered features. "It's not about the equipment, document. It's about understanding how materials behave under stress. Rock has grain patterns, stress fractures, thermal expansion coefficients. Work with those properties instead of against them, and you can move mountains with hand tools." The second day brought complications. The approaching storm system was generating electromagnetic interference that played havoc with their improvised power grid. Twice, Webb had to rebuild sections of the power distribution network when plasma feedback fried the control circuits. Worse, the excavation had revealed that the ridge contained pockets of crystalline formations that shattered unpredictably when heated. 3 times, Webb barely avoided serious injury when sections of tunnel wall collapsed without warning. "Maybe we should consider alternative shelter options," suggested Lieutenant Valder after the third near miss. "The risks are becoming unacceptable." Webb studied the latest collapse, noting the fracture patterns and mineral composition of the fallen material. "Actually, this is good news. Those crystal formations are natural stress concentrators. Once I clear them out, the remaining rock will be much more stable." "Good news." Corwin stared at the rubble blocking half the tunnel entrance. "You nearly got yourself killed." "Nearly doesn't count in construction work," Webb replied cheerfully. "Besides, look at the positive side. Those crystals are pure silicon carbide, perfect for making cutting tools and thermal insulators. Free materials delivered right to our doorstep." By late afternoon on the second day, with the approaching storm visible as a black wall on the eastern horizon, Webb had completed the basic excavation. The underground chamber now measured 4 meters deep, 3 meters wide, and 6 meters long. Enough space for all 23 survivors, with room for supplies and equipment. But excavation was only the beginning. Webb spent the final hours before the storm arrived installing support beams carved from the ship's structural elements, creating ventilation shafts that spiraled up through the rock to hidden surface outlets, and waterproofing the chamber walls using sealant compounds extracted from the ship's hull coating systems. "The attention to detail is extraordinary," Dr. Vasquez commented as she watched Webb install a drainage system that would channel any water seepage away from the living areas. Every element serves multiple functions. The support beams also carry electrical conduits. The ventilation shafts double as emergency escape routes. The drainage system includes filtration components for water recovery. "Efficiency," Webb explained as he put the finishing touches on a lighting system powered by bioluminescent panels salvaged from the ship's emergency equipment. "When you're working with limited resources, everything has to pull double duty." The storm struck just as Webb sealed the final entrance to their underground bunker. This tempest made the previous night's weather look like a gentle rain shower. Lightning bolts thick as tree trunks split the sky, accompanied by thunder that shook the ground. The wind reached velocities that stripped the metallic bark from the strange local trees, turning the landscape into a sandblaster's paradise. Inside their underground refuge, The survivors huddled together in amazement. The chamber was warm, dry, and well-lit. Air circulated freely through Webb's thermal updraft system. A small but functional water recovery system provided drinking water filtered from atmospheric moisture. Even waste management had been addressed through a simple but effective composting system that would eventually provide fertilizer for food production. "This is impossible," whispered Poke Gestran, though his protest lacked its usual conviction. No individual could have constructed such a sophisticated habitat in less than 48 hours. Captain Thane was studying his scanner readings with growing amazement. External temperature has dropped to -30°C. Wind speeds are exceeding 200 kilometers per hour. Lightning strikes are registering energy levels comparable to fusion torpedo detonations. But in here, we are sitting at a comfortable 22 degrees with perfect atmospheric composition. Chief Engineer Corwin was examining Webb's handiwork with professional admiration. The thermal regulation system is brilliant. Uses the planet's geothermal properties combined with the occupant's body heat to maintain optimal temperature. The structural design distributes seismic stress from the surface storms throughout the entire rock formation. Even the lighting system generates supplemental heat as a byproduct. Webb sat near the chamber's center, finally allowing himself a moment of rest. His hands were cut and burned from the construction work. His clothes were torn and stained with a dozen different substances, and exhaustion lined his weathered face. But his eyes held the satisfaction of a craftsman who had built something meant to last. "You know what the really funny thing is?" he said to the assembled survivors. "Back on the mining station, I was just another construction worker. Nothing special, nothing remarkable. But humans, we are all descended from people who built shelters from mammoth bones and cave walls. We are genetically programmed to take whatever materials we can find and turn them into something that will keep us alive." Dr. Vasquez was taking readings with her medical scanner, documenting the chamber's environmental conditions. The psychological effects are as remarkable as the physical construction. Stress hormone levels throughout the group have dropped significantly since entering this space. There's something about being in a properly constructed shelter that provides comfort beyond mere physical protection. The storm raged for 14 hours, longer and more violent than the previous tempest. But Webb's underground bunker weathered the assault without so much as a crack in its walls. The ventilation system continued functioning flawlessly. The lighting remained steady, and the temperature never varied more than 2 degrees from optimal. When the alien dawn finally broke over Kepler, 442b's storm-scoured landscape, the survivors emerging from their bunker found a world transformed. The ship's wreckage had been scattered even further, some pieces buried under tons of debris blown in from across the continent. The temporary shelter Webb had built on the first day was gone, obliterated by lightning strikes and hurricane-force winds. But their underground refuge had protected them completely. 23 beings from 4 different species had survived a planetary storm system that could have powered their homeworlds for months. "Remarkable," said Lieutenant Valder, surveying the devastated landscape. "Without this bunker, we would all be dead." Webb was already planning their next project, his restless mind turning to long-term survival needs. "We will need workshops, food production facilities, expanded living quarters." This was just the emergency phase. Now we start building a real settlement. Pope Gestran stared at the human with something approaching awe. "You speak as if constructing an entire colony from salvage materials is a routine undertaking, isn't it?" Webb's grin was sharp with human humor. "My species has been building civilizations from nothing but raw materials and stubborn determination since before we figured out metallurgy. Give us enough time, and we will turn this whole planet into a garden." Captain Thane was monitoring his scanner, checking for signs of rescue signals. Nothing yet, but he was no longer worried about their long-term survival. With Marcus Webb leading their construction efforts, he was beginning to think they might actually build something better than what they'd lost. "You know," he said to Chief Engineer Corwin, "I'm starting to understand why humans have such a reputation in the engineering community. They don't just solve problems, they turn problems into opportunities." Corwin nodded, his cybernetic arm sparking slightly as he gestured toward the bunker entrance. 24 hours ago, we were facing certain death from exposure and storm damage. Now we're living in a shelter that most species would consider a significant engineering achievement. And he built it with scrap metal and determination. Webb was already sorting through materials salvaged from the latest storm damage, his experience identifying useful components among the debris. Structural elements, power systems, fabrication equipment, all the raw materials needed to build something permanent and substantial. The next storm hits in 3 days, he announced to the group. By then, we will have expanded living quarters, a proper workshop, and maybe even some basic manufacturing capability. Who knows? Give me a month, and I might have us producing our own rescue beacon. The survivors looked at each other, then at the human who had kept them alive through 2 impossible situations. Slowly, they began to understand that their definition of impossible might need permanent revision, because that's what humans do. They build. They survive. They turn the impossible into the inevitable, one stubborn project at a time. And Marcus Webb was just getting started.